He spoke once. Just once. And nothing in me was the same. I had learned not to be heard. This was not something taught in words. It was taught in looks, in the turning away of faces, in the silence that follows a voice nobody wanted to listen to. It was taught in the way a person's eyes pass over you, through you, as if you were not there at all. For years, I can't remember exactly how many anymore, I had perfected the art of silence. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of prayer or contemplation, not the silence of a person who chooses to speak less and listen more. This was different. This was the silence of erasure, the silence of someone sitting in the middle of a crowded place, surrounded by voices, by footsteps, by the constant sound of the world passing by, and none of it knowing you exist, none of it seeing you, none of it caring that you breathe the same air, walk the same earth. You learn this slowly. The lesson comes in small moments. A child who looks at you with fear instead of curiosity. A woman who clutches her purse tighter as she passes. A man who speaks to the person next to you, his voice full and confident, and never once glances in your direction. These moments accumulate. They layer. They become truth. The road was always crowded. Commerce, trade, wealth moving through in different forms. The sounds of it were everywhere. Merchants calling their wares. The wealthy negotiating prices that could feed a family for a year. Laughter, rich laughter, the kind that comes from fullness, from security, from the certainty that the world is built for people like them. Plans made for futures, destinations, purposes. And in the middle of all of this sound, all of this motion, all of this life that moved with such certainty and direction, there was me, sitting, unseen. My voice was not expected. The roads were crowded with voices that mattered, voices with authority, voices attached to bodies that moved through space with intention. My voice was not one of them, not welcome, not necessary, not even noticed. I had learned that too. So I sat, and I listened, and I said nothing. The road became a kind of prison, but not in the way you might think. I was free to leave it. No one held me, but I stayed because this was where I belonged. This was the place for people like me. The edges, the margins, the spaces where the world passed by but never stopped. This was how it had always been. This was how it would always be. But that day, something was different. I felt it before I understood it. A change in the air, a shift in the quality of the sound around me. The crowd was moving differently. There was anticipation in it. Not the casual passing of commerce, but something heavier, something expectant. Something broke inside me. Not gently, not quietly, not in a way I could control or contain. It broke like something that had been held under pressure for too long, finally finding a crack in the wall. Like a dam that could no longer hold back the weight of water behind it, like a voice that had been swallowed for years, suddenly remembering that it was made to be spoken. I couldn't stay silent anymore. If these encounters matter to you, if you want to keep listening when he speaks, subscribe, and remain with us. But what he said next, no one was ready to hear. Not the crowd, not his enemies. Not even his closest friends. Where are you listening from? Write your city or country in the comments. His voice reaches farther than we imagine. That's where I always sat, on the road that connected everything important to everyone else. Jericho was not a poor city. It was a city of palms and balsam, of commerce and wealth. Wealth moved through these streets like water through channels. The rich lived here, in houses with courtyards and gardens. The traders passed through here, bringing goods from distant places. The priests had their residences here, set apart, dignified. The city was built for people who mattered, for transactions that held weight, for voices that were heard and respected. I was not one of those people. I was not one of those voices. The road that ran through Jericho was not exceptionally wide, but it felt endless when you were sitting at its edge, watching it pass, And it did pass. Everything passed. The entire world seemed to be in motion, and I was the only still thing in it. Feet in sandals made of leather you could never afford. Robes dyed with colors that came from somewhere far away, colors that spoke of expense and trade and importance, the scent of incense and oils and spices that meant money, that meant these people had access to things beyond mere survival. The sound of conversations conducted in the language of certainty, people talking to each other as if the world belonged to them, as if their plans mattered, as if their futures were guaranteed. And perhaps they were. I knew these feet by their sound. The merchant's step was quick, purposeful, the gait of someone with places to be. The weight of coins in his purse made a soft jingle when he walked. Not a loud noise, but enough that you knew he carried value with him. The priest's sandals made a different sound entirely. Heavier, more deliberate, each footfall like a small statement of authority. The women's steps were lighter, often hurried, always going somewhere with intention. Children ran sometimes, their footsteps rapid and chaotic, the sound of freedom and play. Old people moved slowly, their steps careful and measured, but even they moved with purpose. Nobody lingered. Nobody stopped. Nobody sat. The road kept moving, and the world happened on it, and I sat at the edge of it, watching, listening, present in body but absent in every way that mattered, invisible. This was my place, not by choice but by necessity, by the simple physical fact that I could not see the road, so I sat at its edge. And because I sat at its edge, because that was where blind people sat, I became part of the edge, part of the margins, part of the things that were there but not truly seen, not truly acknowledged, not truly included in the world that moved so confidently around me. The world had ordered itself in a way that made sense to everyone except me. I was the blind man. That was all I was. Not a person with a name, or if I had one, no one used it. Not anyone with a history, with a past, with a family that had meant something. Not someone with thoughts and dreams and a capacity to contribute something to the world. I was a category, a condition, a problem that the city had learned to step around without stepping on. The blind man who sat on the road and did not move, who did not ask for much, who understood his place and stayed in it. I had become this designation. It was all I was, and I no longer expected anything else. The only thing that still belonged to me was the cloak. It was worn. The fabric was thin in places, so thin you could nearly see through it. It had been patched so many times that the patches had patches, layers of repair stacked upon each other, a history of breaking and being put back together. But it was mine. It was the only possession I had that held any weight, any meaning. It was my shelter when it rained and the water came down hard on the road. It was my blanket when I slept, when I curled up on the stone and tried to warm myself against the night. It was my proof that I had once owned something. It was the last visible sign that I had not completely disappeared. I wrapped it around myself each morning. This was a ritual, a small act of claiming myself back from the night, from the erasure, from the endless invisibility. I adjusted it when the wind came through the valley and threatened to tear it away. I held it when the cold found me, when I shivered despite the heat of the day. And in some way that I could not explain to myself, holding it meant that I still existed, that I still had a body that could be protected, that somewhere inside this systematic erasure there was still something to preserve. My body, my breath, my small, unmeasured life. The cloak meant I was still here. This was how it would always be. I had made peace with this truth. Not the peace that comes from acceptance, not the peace that brings contentment or rest, but the peace of resignation, the peace that comes when you have waited long enough that waiting becomes your nature. When you stop expecting anything at all, and in that stopping, you find a kind of relief. Relief that you no longer have to hope, relief that you no longer have to wonder. Sit, listen, own nothing. Be nothing. This was the order of things. The road was the world, and the world was the road, and I was the edge of it, the part that served as a border between the alive and the still, between the moving and the stationed, between the people and the thing that was not quite a person. And I remained, always in the same place, always invisible, always waiting for a day that would never come. Because who would stop for someone like me? Who would turn from their journey? Who would interrupt their purpose? Who would pull their attention away from the certainty of their destination to notice a blind man sitting at the edge of the road? It made no sense. It violated every law of how the world was ordered. It was not the way things happened. And so I had made peace with it. This was the final peace, the peace of never. The road was endless, and I would sit here forever. Something was different that day. I felt it before I understood it. A change in the air, a shift in the quality of the sound around me. The crowd was moving differently. Not faster exactly, but with a different rhythm. The noise had a different texture. There was anticipation in it. Not the casual passing of commerce, but something heavier. Something expectant. Something that made my body register a change even though my mind was trying to tell me that nothing had changed at all. That this was just another day. That I should not allow myself to be disrupted by a feeling. This was dangerous. Change was dangerous for someone like me. Change meant disruption of the order that had kept me safe. Change meant that the world might be something other than what I had learned it to be. And if the world was something other than what I had learned, then I would have no defenses left, no understanding, no way to navigate. I had learned this through years of careful observation. I had learned this through disappointment after disappointment. I had learned this through the simple, repeated lesson that the world was ordered in a certain way, and my place in that order was fixed. And now the stillness was breaking. The sound of the crowd was building, not in volume exactly, but in something else. In texture, in intention, in the kind of energy that comes when people are waiting for something they expect to matter, when their attention is pulled in a direction that is not the usual direction of their days, when there is an orientation toward something that is not commerce, not passing through, but something else entirely. Something was coming down the road. Or someone. The word did not form completely in my mind, but I felt it moving there like a ghost, like something I was trying not to think because thinking it would be too dangerous. Someone. A person. A presence. Something that was not the normal passage of the world, but something that had weight. Something that had the power to disrupt. My heart did something I had trained it never to do. It moved. It quickened. It remembered what it was like to feel hope, even though hope had been buried so deep inside me for so long that I had convinced myself it was dead. I had forgotten what hope felt like. I had forgotten the way it moved through the body, the way it made you alert, the way it made you feel alive. But it was not dead. It was only sleeping. And something about this moment, this change in the air, this shifting of the crowd's energy, this approaching sound that was different from all other sounds, had woken it. No. Stop. I had to stop this immediately. I had learned this lesson already. I had learned it 1,000 times over the years, in 1,000 different ways, through 1,000 different moments of disappointment. I had learned it through the faces that turned away, through the feet that passed without pausing, through the silence that greeted my voice. I had learned it through my own experience, which was the only teacher that mattered. Hope was the most dangerous thing a person like me could feel. Hope was what made you believe that the world was different than it actually was. Hope was what made you expect things that would never come. Hope was what filled you with a hunger that the world had no intention of satisfying. Hope was what took a person who had learned to accept their place and turned them into a beggar, hoping for scraps that would never be given. Hope was what destroyed you, and I had worked so hard to bury it. He wouldn't speak to someone like me. I knew this with a certainty that felt like truth. It was not a thought I was having for the first time. It was something I had always known, something that had been confirmed 1,000 times over by the way the world worked. I had seen it happen again and again. The important people, the people who mattered, the people who moved through the world with purpose and certainty. They had their own concerns. They had their own destinations. They had their own reasons for existing. They did not stop for people like me. Why would they? Even if he saw me. Even if his eyes fell upon this place where I sat, this edge of the road where the invisible gathered. Even if he saw me with his own 2 eyes, looked directly at me, he would turn away. They always did. It was the natural law of the world. The important look at the unimportant for a moment, and then they remember why they are important and they move on. He would turn away. I was certain of it. But my chest was breaking open. There was a pressure building inside me, something that felt like it might split my ribs from the inside out. It was the pressure of a hope that I did not want. The pressure of a desire that I had thought was dead. The pressure of a body that still wanted things, that still yearned for things, that still remembered what it was like to feel alive, to feel seen, to feel like you mattered. My hands were shaking. I could feel them moving against the fabric of my cloak. I could feel the tremor in them, the nervous energy, the way my body was betraying me by responding to something that my mind knew was foolish, that my experience knew was impossible, that my whole history as an invisible person knew could not happen. I had to stop this. I had to pull myself back into the resignation that had saved me. I had to remember the lessons I had learned through years of painful observation. I had to convince my body that what it was feeling was not real, was not possible, was not for someone like me. I had to remind myself that the safest thing was to want nothing, to expect nothing, to remain in the stillness that had become my home. But the sound kept building. The crowd kept growing closer. The anticipation kept thickening. The air kept changing in a way that my whole body could feel, even though I could not see what was happening, even though I did not know what was coming, even though every part of my learned wisdom told me that I should not allow myself to hope. All I knew was that something was coming, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, a part of me that I thought had died was suddenly, terrifyingly, desperately alive. It was breaking through the walls I had built around it. It was waking up from a sleep so deep I had thought it was death. It was moving through me like fire, like water, like something that had been held under pressure for so long that it was finally finding a crack through which to escape, and I could not stop it. But what if he speaks? The noise grew closer, closer. I could hear it even in my sitting, even in the resignation I had wrapped around myself like the cloak. The quality of the sound was changing, the texture of it, the way it moved through the air toward me. Words reached me, scattered, fragmented, pieces of conversations that did not form a complete picture, only impressions, only echoes. The master, teacher. I caught these fragments like someone catching rain in cupped hands, and they meant nothing and they meant everything. Each word was a brick, and they were building something in the air above my head, something I could not see but could feel taking shape. I didn't know his name. Not yet. I had heard rumors, of course, in the way that rumors reached even the invisible, in the way that the edges of the world, where I sat, caught the overflow of information that the important people were discussing. A teacher, a healer, someone who spoke with authority, someone who gathered crowds, someone who did things that did not fit into the normal order of how the world worked. But this was dangerous ground. Rumors were dangerous because they fed hope. Rumors were the food that kept hope alive when you had been trying to starve it to death. And I had worked so hard to starve hope. I had worked so hard to make it stop moving inside me, to make it stop asking for things, to make it stop believing in possibilities that were not possible for someone like me. But now the rumors were growing louder, not just louder in volume. That would have been manageable. I could have adjusted to a simple increase in sound, but this was louder in intensity, louder in the way the words were spoken, louder in conviction. The whispers had become conversations. The conversations had become excitement. The excitement had become something almost visible, something that moved through the crowd like electricity through water, like something alive and aware and purposeful. He was coming. The words moved through the crowd like a current. Not announced, not proclaimed, but simply understood. Known, felt. He was coming down the road. He was on his way. He was moving in this direction. He was close. My body knew this before my mind could process it, before I could stop it from knowing. My body was alert in a way it had not been alert in years. Every sense I had left, hearing, smell, touch, the internal sense of presence and proximity, was straining outward, trying to understand what was approaching, trying to feel the shape of it, the weight of it, the intention of it. The crowd was large now. I could feel the difference in the number of people. The road that was usually a passage, a place through which the world moved from one place to another, had become a gathering place. The casual movement had become something else entirely, a converging. People were not just passing anymore. They were gathering. They were stopping. They were waiting, just as something inside me that I did not want to acknowledge was waiting. The space around me was filling with bodies. Closer than they usually came to where I sat. People were moving toward the center of the road, toward where he would be, and in doing so they were moving closer to me. Their feet were coming closer to my feet. Their bodies were occupying the space that usually remained empty around me. I was no longer on the margins. I was becoming part of the crowd. It was terrifying. It was also the most alive I had felt in years. The sound of his voice reached me first. Not his actual voice speaking to me, but the sound of him speaking. To others, to the crowd, to whoever was closest to him, to the important people, to the ones who mattered. The sound was different from other sounds. Not louder, but different in quality. Different in the way that it seemed to carry something with it. Authority, presence, certainty, something that made even the sound of his voice matter in a way that other voices did not matter, in a way that made people listen, in a way that made people stop what they were doing and pay attention. I could stay silent. I should stay silent. This was the voice of wisdom. This was the voice of the resignation that had kept me safe. This was the voice that whispered, "Do not interrupt. Do not call out. Do not draw attention to yourself. Do not hope for something that will only humiliate you further. Do not make yourself more visible than you already are. Do not ask for things that will not be given. Do not believe that the world has changed." The voice was persuasive. It was also fading, because underneath it, something else was happening. Something was moving inside me. Something was waking up. Something that had been dormant for so long that I had thought it was dead was suddenly, shockingly, beginning to move. I could stay silent, but I could not stay still. I could feel it happening in my body before I made a conscious decision. A shifting, a movement, my weight redistributing, my muscles preparing themselves for action. Something inside me that had been compressed into stillness for so long that I had forgotten it could move was suddenly remembering its nature, remembering that bodies were made to move, that silence could be broken, that invisibility could be challenged. I stood. My body moved before my mind could stop it, before the voice of wisdom could convince me otherwise, before I could remember all the reasons why this was foolish. I stood, and the moment I did, I became visible in a new way. I was no longer just sitting at the edge. I was standing. I was present. I was a part of the crowd, or at least I was trying to be. I was no longer resigned to my place. The people around me noticed. I could feel their attention shift like a physical thing. The blind man at the edge was now standing. The invisible person had made himself more visible. There was something unusual about this. There was something that broke the pattern. There was something that suggested I believed something different about my place in the world than I had believed before. I could feel their judgment. I could feel their question. What is he doing? What is he doing standing? What is he doing moving? What is he doing hoping? But I could not stop now. The sound of his presence was growing in a way that was undeniable. Not just the sound of his voice, but the sound of the movement around him. The sound of people responding. The sound of the crowd itself organizing itself around his arrival. People were moving. People were gathering. People were being drawn by something that I could not see but could feel with every part of my being. He was very close now. Closer than seemed possible. Closer than seemed real. The road that I had sat on for so long, the road that had stretched out in both directions like an endless line, was suddenly shrinking. The distance between where I stood and where he was becoming measurable, was becoming small, was becoming something that could be crossed. Closer, louder, nearer. Now, he was there, on the same road, where I was. I couldn't see him, but I felt him. The presence of him was like a pressure in the air, like something that had weight and shape even though my eyes could not register it. I knew he was there because my whole body knew it, because the way the air moved around me had changed, because the quality of the sound had shifted, because the way the crowd organized itself told me exactly where he was, how close he was, what direction he was moving. He was moving through the road, moving past the people who clustered around him, moving through the space that had been created for him, moving in a direction, following a path, pursuing a purpose that would take him away from where I stood, away from this edge of the road, away from the invisible people who sat and waited and hoped for nothing, away from me. The words formed in my throat. They had been forming there for so long, ever since I first felt him coming down the road. They had been forming during the time when I was standing, waiting, listening. They had been building, pressing against the walls of my silence, demanding to be spoken, demanding to break through. They were ready. They were fully formed. They were waiting only for me to release them, to let them out, to break the silence that had contained me for so long. But my mind was screaming at me to be silent. My mind was screaming at me to be wise, to understand the order of things, to accept my place, to recognize that there were appropriate ways to behave, and this was not one of them. He didn't notice me. I could feel this with the same certainty that I felt his presence. He was moving through the crowd, and the crowd was responding to him, and he was responding to them, and nowhere in that exchange was there any awareness of me. Nowhere was there a moment where his attention turned in my direction. Nowhere was there any indication that I existed in his awareness. Why would there be? I was invisible to the world. I had accepted this. I had made my peace with this. So, of course, I was invisible to him as well. Of course, he did not notice me. Of course, his attention was directed at the people who mattered, at the ones whose voices could be heard through the noise, at the ones whose existence was registered and acknowledged. And then they began to tell me to be quiet. It started as a whisper, a shushing sound from someone near me, a hand gesture, a look that conveyed something very simple. Do not speak. Do not interrupt. Do not draw attention to yourself. Do not disturb the order. But as I felt the words pressing harder against my throat, as I felt them demanding more urgently to be released, the whispers became something louder. Be quiet. Don't disturb him. Leave him alone. He's not here for people like you. Why would you think you could speak to him? The voices of the crowd, the collective voice of the people around me, all of them suddenly, unanimously turning their attention toward me with a single message. You do not belong here. Your voice is not welcome. Your desire is not appropriate. Your need is not important. They were protecting him from me. Or perhaps they were protecting themselves, protecting the order, protecting the understood hierarchy of the world where some people mattered and some people did not, protecting the natural law that said the visible spoke to the visible, and the invisible remained invisible. And I did not belong in this moment. I did not belong in this space. I should leave now. This was the rational thought. This was the voice of experience. This was the wise thought that had kept me safe all these years. I had stood. I had drawn attention. I had made it clear that I was aware of his presence, that I was claiming some kind of connection or possibility. But I could still leave. I could still step back into the margins where I belonged. I could still remove myself from the situation before it became something worse, before it became something more shameful, before the humiliation became complete. I could still salvage my dignity by accepting my place. I should leave while I still could, but my chest was breaking open. There was a pressure building inside me that was greater than the pressure of the words in my throat. There was a pain rising in me that was greater than the pain of shame. There was something moving inside my body that did not care about wisdom, that did not care about propriety, that did not care about the proper order of things or the appropriate way to behave or the way that people like me were supposed to accept their invisibility. This was foolish. To stand here against the will of the crowd, to feel his presence moving away from me and to want to call after him, to feel the impossibility of the situation and to want to try anyway, to believe that my voice could matter when every moment of my life had taught me that my voice did not matter. This was the definition of foolishness. This was what happened when hope took control and reason stepped aside. This was what happened when a person stopped accepting their place and started believing that they might deserve something different, that they might be worth stopping for. This was not wise. This was not safe. This was not the rational response. This was foolish, and yet my body would not move backward. My feet would not carry me away from this moment. My legs would not obey the command to retreat. My voice would not consent to remaining silent. The thing that had woken up inside me would not go back to sleep. It was alive now, and it was moving, and it was stronger than all the reasonable thoughts in my mind, stronger than all the years of learned resignation, stronger than the voice that had kept me safe by teaching me to want nothing. He was moving away. I could feel it. The presence that had been growing closer, that had been approaching like a fire that was drawing near, was now beginning to move past me, beginning to move away down the road. His attention was following the people who had walked with him all this time, the ones who belonged with him, the ones whose voices he wanted to hear. The moment was closing. I could feel the door shutting. I could feel the window of possibility narrowing. I could feel the space for this to happen contracting. In moments, he would be gone. In moments, he would be so far away that it would no longer matter what I did, what I said, what I felt. In moments, this opportunity, if it even was an opportunity and not just the cruel hope of a desperate man, would be gone forever. And I would spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I had been brave enough to break the silence, if I had been foolish enough to hope. My hands were trembling. My breath was coming in short bursts. My whole body was vibrating with a conflict that seemed like it might tear me apart from the inside. On one side, safety, resignation, wisdom, the known, the accepted, the safe. On the other side, foolishness, vulnerability, exposure, the impossible, the desire, the desperate, hungry need to be seen, to be heard, to matter. The moment was closing. The door was shutting. The moment of possibility was narrowing. In seconds, he would be gone. In seconds, it would be too late. And my voice was still trapped inside me, locked behind my fear, locked behind my shame, locked behind every lesson I had ever learned about my place in the world, locked behind years of being told to be quiet, locked behind the fear of humiliation, the fear of rejection, the fear of speaking and being ignored, being dismissed, being told once again that I did not matter. But my chest was breaking open. He stopped. That is all it took. One moment, he was moving away, moving past me, moving in the direction of his own purpose, his own mission, his own understanding of where he needed to be. I could feel him moving. I could feel the energy of the crowd following him. I could feel the moment closing, the door shutting, the opportunity disappearing. And then he stopped. Not gradually, not as if he had been slowing down and finally came to a rest, but suddenly, absolutely, as if something had interrupted the forward motion of his entire existence, as if something had caused him to pause in the middle of whatever he was doing, whatever he was thinking, whatever purpose he was pursuing. He stopped, and everything changed in that silence. The silence was immediate. It was complete. The crowd, which had been moving with him, suddenly understood that movement was no longer happening. The people who had been walking with him, speaking with him, surrounding him, suddenly became still. They felt it. They understood it. Something had happened. Something had broken through. And in that silence, I heard his voice. But he was not speaking to me. Not yet. He was speaking to the crowd. He was speaking to the people around him. He was asking a question. His voice was different when he was asking. It was different from when he was teaching. It was not the voice of instruction. It was the voice of someone who had stopped in the middle of everything, who had turned his attention, who had redirected his focus. Call him. That is what he said. That is what I heard echo through the silence of the stopped crowd. Not a shout, not an urgent command, but a word spoken with such authority, such clarity, such certainty that it changed everything. Call him. Bring him to me. And the crowd that had been telling me to be silent suddenly changed. The hypocrisy was immediate. The same voices that had been saying, "Be quiet," suddenly became voices saying, "Come. He's calling you. Have courage. He's calling you." The hands that had been pushing me away were now pulling me forward. The rejection became acceptance. The silence that I had been commanded to keep became a path that had been opened. They were lifting me up. I didn't need to understand what was happening. I didn't need to see it. My body understood. My body knew that something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in the way the world was ordered. The people around me were moving me toward him. They were speaking differently. They were treating me differently. I was no longer invisible. The words were coming out of my mouth now. The words that had been locked in my throat were being released. I could hear myself speaking them. I could feel them moving through the air. I could hear the response they created. "Rabbi, let me recover my sight." These were my words. These were the words I had been forming in my throat since the moment I felt him coming. These were the words that the silence and the resignation and the fear had tried to keep locked inside me. And now they were being spoken. Now they were being heard. Now they were in the air between me and him. I was standing before him. I didn't need to see him to know this. I could feel his presence in front of me. I could feel the way the air moved around him. I could feel the weight of his attention. I could feel what it was like to be seen, to be truly seen. Not looked at and then looked away from, but seen, regarded, noticed, attended to. This was different from anything I had ever experienced. His voice came again, but this time it was speaking directly to me. This time the words were mine to receive. This time he was not asking the crowd. He was not instructing the people around him. He was speaking to me, only to me. "Your faith has healed you. Go. Your faith has made you well." These words entered me like something alive, like something that had weight and power and intention. The words, "Your faith has made you well," did not come with explanation. They did not come with theology. They came with authority. They came as a statement of reality. They came as a truth that was being spoken into being. And I understood. I understood that something had happened inside me that could not be undone. I understood that the moment I had broken my silence, the moment I had spoken despite the crowd, despite the fear, despite the lifetime of learning to be invisible, that moment had changed something, not just in the world around me, but in me, and the blindness left. The moment the words left his mouth, the moment those words settled into the space between us, something shifted inside my eyes. Something opened. Something that had been closed since before I could remember suddenly became open, suddenly became able to see. The first thing I saw was him. I could see his face. I could see the way he was looking at me. I could see something in his eyes that I had never seen in anyone's eyes before. Not pity, not charity, not the kind of look that sees a problem and decides to fix it, but something else, something that looked at me as if I mattered, as if my voice mattered, as if the moment I broke my silence was the moment everything became possible. Everything else disappeared. The crowd was still there. The road was still there. The city of Jericho was still there. But none of it mattered anymore. None of it registered. There was only his presence and my sight, and the realization that the person who had been invisible was now visible. Not just visible to him, but visible to myself. I could see my own hands. I could see the cloak that I had held onto for so long. I could see the road where I had sat. I could see the world. But more than that, I could see that I had been right to break the silence. I was right to hope when I had been taught that hope was foolish. I was right to speak when I had been taught that my voice did not matter. I was right to believe that there was something more possible than the resignation I had accepted. If his words reached you, if something inside you recognized his voice, leave a like. It helps these words reach others who are listening. And I began to follow him. Not because I had to, not because I was commanded to, but because the person who had been invisible had been made visible, and the only response that made sense was to follow, to stay close, to remain in the presence of the one who had stopped for me. The road that I had sat on for so long was now a road I could walk on. The invisibility that had defined me for so long was now something I could see past. I could see the world now. I could see the faces of the people around me. I could see the way they were looking at me, some with wonder, some with confusion, some with something like joy. But mostly, I could see him, and that was enough. That was everything. The blindness was gone. I opened my eyes, or they opened themselves, I do not know which, and the world rushed in. Light, color, shape, distance, all of it at once, overwhelming and perfect and real in a way that nothing had ever been real before. But I did not look at the world. I looked at him. I saw, and it was the only thing that mattered. Not because it was beautiful in the conventional sense, not because it was kind in the way that people are kind, but because it was real, because it was present, because it was the face of the one who had stopped for me, because it was the proof that I had not imagined this moment, that I had not invented this encounter in my desperate, invisible mind. He was real, and I was seeing him. The world around him was also real now. The light that filled my eyes was unlike anything I could have imagined. I had no words for it. I had no reference for it. Light was a concept I had only heard about. Now I was seeing it. Now it was flooding into my eyes and my mind, and something deep inside my chest that had been empty was suddenly being filled. The colors were overwhelming. Reds and browns and golds and the green of the trees and the pale blue of the sky above. I had no names for half of what I was seeing. I had no way to organize it in my mind. It was too much and not enough at the same time. I wanted to look at everything and look at nothing but his face. The crowd was moving around me. I could see them now. I could see their faces, their expressions, the way they were looking at me. Some with wonder, some with confusion, some with something like joy or disbelief or suspicion. I could see the way they were measuring this moment, the way they were deciding what to believe about what had just happened, the way they were beginning to integrate this into their understanding of the world. But I did not need to understand what they were feeling. I did not need to care about their reaction. I did not need to defend myself or explain myself or convince them of anything. The moment when their opinion mattered, if it ever mattered at all, was gone. That was a concern for the invisible. That was a concern for someone whose existence depended on the approval of others. I was not invisible anymore. I could feel the cloak around my shoulders. I could see it with my own eyes now. I could see how worn it was, how patched, how thin in places. It had been my shelter, my proof of existence, my last possession. The only thing that had told me I still belonged to the world. But now I was seeing it clearly, and it was just cloth. Just fabric, just a thing that had kept me warm, but had never been who I was. I could let it go now. Not because anyone had told me to, not because it was expected, but because I no longer needed it to prove that I existed. I no longer needed it to keep me tethered to the world. I was tethered to the world now by something else, by the fact that I had spoken, by the fact that I had been heard, by the fact that I had been seen by the one who mattered most. I began to follow him, not because I was told to, not because I understood what would happen next or where he was going or what it would mean to follow, but because there was no other place I could go, no other direction that made sense, no other choice that was actually a choice. The only logical response to being seen by him was to stay close to him, to remain in the presence of the one who had stopped for me. The person who had been invisible was now walking toward the light. The road was different now. I could see it clearly, the dust on it, the stones, the way it stretched out in both directions. The road that had been my prison, not because I was chained to it, but because I had accepted it as my only place, was now the path I was walking on. Not as a prisoner, but as a person who had chosen to move, to go somewhere, to follow. My feet were moving with purpose. They were moving toward him. They were moving away from the edge where I had sat. They were moving into the crowd, into the space, into the life that had seemed impossible before. The feet that had never walked with direction were now walking. The legs that had grown stiff from sitting were now remembering how to move. The body that I had thought was trapped was now discovering that it had always been capable of movement. I did not know where he was going. I did not know what would happen next. I did not know if there would be other moments like this, other encounters, other times when he would stop for me. I did not know if this was the beginning of something vast, or the whole of something small, or a moment that would never come again. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I knew that I could not go back to the road. I could not go back to sitting at the edge. I could not go back to silence. I could not go back to invisibility. Not because it was forbidden. Not because I would be punished. Not because someone had told me I was not allowed, but because I was changed. Because something inside me had been opened and could not be closed again. Because I had been seen, and being seen had made me real in a way I had not been real before. The blindness was gone. But more than that, the blindness inside me was gone. The blindness that had taught me I did not matter. The blindness that had convinced me my voice was not worth speaking. The blindness that had made me believe that invisibility was my destiny, that my place was fixed, that the world was ordered in a way that left no room for someone like me. That blindness was gone, and I could see the road ahead. I could see the people around me. I could see myself as I truly was, not as a category, not as a condition, not as a problem to be stepped around, but as a person, as someone who had a voice, as someone whose voice mattered, as someone who was worthy of being stopped for, as someone who was real. The crowd was still around me. I could hear them talking. I could feel their presence, but it was as if I was hearing them from a great distance, as if they were in a different world now. The world of judgment and silence and invisibility. That world still existed. Those people were still there. But I was not. I had left it. I had walked away from it. I was following him. And that was all that mattered. My feet were moving. My eyes were open. My voice was no longer locked inside me. The cloak was still on my shoulders, but it no longer defined me. It was just cloth now, just fabric, just a thing that had kept me warm, but had never been who I was. Who I was had been locked inside all along. Who I was had been waiting to be spoken. Who I was had been waiting for someone to stop and listen. Who I was had been buried under years of resignation and invisibility and learned helplessness. But it was awake now. It was alive now. It was moving forward. And he had stopped. He had stopped in the middle of his mission, in the middle of his purpose, in the middle of his journey toward the cross. He had stopped because he heard me. He had stopped because my voice mattered. He had stopped because I was worth stopping for, and I was awake. The road behind me was empty now. The place where I had sat was no longer my place. The silence that had contained me was no longer my silence. I was moving forward, following the one who had stopped for me, and I would never return to that edge of the road. Never, because I had been seen, and being seen had made me free. You, listening now, in this moment, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, there is a voice reaching you, and you have to decide if you will listen or if you will turn away. Are you sitting on a road, invisible in a crowd? Not a physical road, perhaps, but a place in your life where you do not belong. A space where you are present but not seen. A location where you have learned to make yourself small so that you do not disrupt the order of things. Are you sitting in a job where your ideas are never heard? In a family where your voice is always quieted? In a community where you have learned that people like you do not speak? Are they telling you to be quiet? The voices are constant, are they not? Not always loud, sometimes quiet, sometimes just the absence of response when you try to speak, sometimes just the way people's eyes pass over you as if you are not there, sometimes just the learned understanding that your words will not be welcomed, that your voice is not appropriate, that your place is not to speak, but to sit and listen and accept. But what if that is not true? What if the voice you are supposed to listen to is not the voice of the crowd telling you to be silent, but a voice that is coming to stop for you? A voice that is moving through the world, stopping for people like you, calling people out of invisibility into sight? Are the voices around you, the voices of people who think they know your place, who think they understand what is possible for someone like you? Are those voices louder than the voice inside you that is asking for something different? There is a voice coming. You may not hear it yet. You may not know its name. You may not understand what it means, or where it comes from, or why it would ever stop for someone like you. But somewhere in the world, somewhere in the possibility of your life, there is a voice that stops, a voice that interrupts, a voice that pauses in the middle of its own mission, in the middle of its own certainty, in the middle of its own journey toward purposes you cannot see, and listens. And when he stops, everything changes. Not because the world around you becomes different. Not because the people who told you to be quiet suddenly become kind. Not because the road you are standing on suddenly becomes smooth or easy to walk. But because you do. Because something inside you that has been waiting, that has been asking, that has been locked away in silence suddenly becomes real, suddenly becomes possible, suddenly becomes alive. You have a voice. It may have been taught to you that your voice does not matter. It may have been shown to you 1,000 times over the years that when you speak, people look away. It may have seemed clear to you, demonstrated again and again, that your words are not welcome in the world of important people, in the world of people who matter, in the world where things happen. But this voice that is coming, this voice hears differently. When he hears you, when he stops because he hears you, you will understand something that will change you forever. You will understand that you have always mattered, that your voice has always been worth listening to, that the invisibility you accepted was never the truth about you. It was only the lie that the world told you about yourself. It was only the fiction that everyone agreed to maintain so that the order could be preserved. But the order is not the truth, and your invisibility is not your destiny. Can you hear him calling? Can you feel the moment when everything shifts? When the people who told you to be silent suddenly become irrelevant? When the crowd that rejected you becomes background noise, becomes water you can walk through, becomes something you can leave behind? When the presence of the one who sees you becomes more real than the opinion of 1,000 invisible crowds? This is not about healing your eyes. This is about something deeper. This is about the blindness inside you, the blindness that has taught you that you do not deserve to be seen, the blindness that has convinced you that your place in the world is fixed, unchangeable, sealed by something beyond your control, the blindness that has made you believe that the world is ordered in a way that has no room for you, no place for your voice, no possibility for your transformation. But there is a voice that stops for the invisible. There is a presence that interrupts its own journey to listen to a cry that comes from the margins. There is a power that looks at someone the world has forgotten and sees them, really sees them, not as a problem to be solved, not as a category to be managed, but as a person, as someone whose voice matters, as someone who is worthy of being stopped for. And when you are seen like this, when you are truly seen by the one who can see, something inside you awakens. Something that you thought was dead comes alive. Something that you thought was impossible becomes real. The voice that has been locked inside you finds its way out into the air. The person who has been invisible begins to walk toward the light. The blindness, both the blindness of the eyes and the blindness of the spirit, begins to fall away. You will not be the same. Once you are seen, you cannot unsee yourself. Once you have been heard, you cannot go back to silence. Once you have been recognized as someone who matters, you cannot return to the margins as if nothing happened. You cannot pretend that you are still invisible when you know that you have been seen. This is what happens when you break your silence. This is what happens when you speak despite the fear. Despite the 1,000 times you have been taught that hope is foolish. Despite the voices telling you to be quiet, despite the weight of your own resignation. This is what happens when you allow yourself to hope. This is what happens when you look at the voice that is calling and answer. You become free. Not free from the crowd, not free from the road, not free from the difficulty of living in a world that does not always see you, but free from the belief that you deserve invisibility, free from the lie that your voice does not matter, free from the thought that your place is fixed and unchangeable, free to follow the one who stopped for you, free to be seen, free to be known, free to matter. Next, someone ordinary will hear an extraordinary voice and walk away changed forever. If you want to continue walking through these encounters, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Remain, listen, and walk with us. Because the Nazarene speaks.